And folks, you can gather in a little bit closer if you want. I don't think anybody here's going to bite or anything.
We were so busy blabbing we didn't notice everybody.
That's okay. Right on time. So how's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
Good. All right. First of all, on behalf of the National Park Service, let me welcome you to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name's Ranger Karlton Smith, and I'll be with you about the next 2 hours as we talk about the 2nd Division of the 3rd Corps under the command of General Andrew Atkinson Humphreys. And as Humphreys himself is going to describe this, he had to conduct a fighting withdrawal on the afternoon of July 2nd. We're going to be starting just a quick introduction here, then moving up to the Sickles Monument just past the horses, coming back here and then down U.S. Avenue. We're going to go down to the intersection of Sickles Avenue, and then oddly we're going to go over to General Birney's line, because one of Humphreys' regiments ends up over there fighting just for a short time. Then we're going to come back and start walking along Humphreys' line and end over at the Rogers House site on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road. And from there, you'll have 2 ways of getting back. You can either retrace the route on Sickles and U.S. Avenue, or you can follow the horse trail. And it took me about 10 minutes to come down the horse trail. Okay, the horse trail is relatively smooth. It's not really too rough or anything. You just have to be mindful of where you step. Okay, that's it. But also on the horse trail, just as a footnote, and one thing you don't often hear about here is between them, the 2 armies arrived in Gettysburg with something close to 70,000 horses. And one horse can leave behind about 10 pounds of manure a day. So over 1.5 tons of manure on this field in that nice hot July weather. So I can only imagine what it was like here. People said you could smell Gettysburg for up to a month after the battle. And the smells were so bad that people in town at night would close their windows. And of course, back in the days before air conditioning, they'd rather sleep in a stuffy old house than have that smell come in. So this was not the place to visit for any reason in the month of July. But what we're going to do is come up here and we'll probably walk behind the guide to go up towards Sickles Monument. Up there, I'll tell you a little bit more about Andrew Humphreys and why I think to me, he kind of resembles Captain Quigg from the Caine Mutiny. And I'll explain that when we get up to the top. And if at any time of the program if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. And I'll be glad to try to answer them for you. But first of all, this is Brigadier General Andrew Atkinson Humphreys. Okay? Now, Humphreys was 53 years old here at Gettysburg. He was a graduate of West Point, had served his entire military career with the engineers. So he never commanded troops or anything like that. Now, Humphreys, he's going to be with the topographical engineers, and he's made a brigadier general in April of 1862. He's going to command the 3rd Division of the 5th Corps, which arrives on the battlefield of Antietam the day after the battle. So he's going to miss that altogether. He will be involved in the Battle of Fredericksburg. Now, most of the units in the 3rd Division are actually 9-month men. So you want to keep that in mind, okay? And one of the things that's going to happen is around the time of Fredericksburg, Humphreys is going to order Colonel Jacob Frick of the 129th Pennsylvania, one of those 9-month units that's going to be discharged in May, that Humphreys wants Frick to order his men to buy dress uniforms, the Army dress coat. And Frick's going to refuse. He said, I'm not going to have my men pay for something they're going to wear maybe once and that's it. So Humphreys placed him under arrest. And then he ordered the Lieutenant Colonel William Armstrong to do the same thing. He refused, so Humphrey placed him under arrest and deferred court-martial charges. Now here's where some of this takes some explanation. Prior to the Civil War, the U.S. regular army only numbered about 16,000 officers and men, and that's it. And except for a few artillery companies manning forts along the Atlantic and the Gulf Coast, the vast majority of the army was west of the Mississippi River. Part of the reasoning behind West Point was in case of a national emergency, we had a cadre of trained officers who could raise all new Army units, get them properly trained, equipped, and officered, and ready for the field. Of course, before 1860, when we thought of a national emergency, we were thinking probably of another war with Great Britain. And it's going to take the British several months to get troops over here. So we had that lag time to get ready. But now we have a civil war in our hands. And we not only don't have time to raise all new units, we barely have enough time to bring the old Army units in from the west. So the government's going to depend on what's called the Volunteer Army. And those are units raised by the states, like the 20th Maine, 69th New York, 24th Michigan, 1st Minnesota, and then in a sense loaned to the federal government to put down the rebellion. Because they want good officers, especially West Point if they can get them, to command the higher elevations in the Army, the War Department adopts a policy that regular Army officers can take a leave of absence to accept commissions in the Volunteer Army, provided it's nothing less than a colonel. And the classic example of this is a young man from Monroe, Michigan, named George Custer. On the morning of June 28, 1863, Custer is a captain in the regular Army. And by the afternoon, he's a brigadier general of volunteers. By the end of the war, he's a lieutenant colonel in the regular Army and a major general of volunteers. When the war is over, the Volunteer Army is disbanded. And officers like Custer now revert back to the regular Army rank of lieutenant colonel. Okay? Got that so far? So Humphreys is going to be a brigadier general of volunteers. Now, according to the regulations, volunteer officers were not supposed to be tried by regular Army officers because there was a feeling the regular officers might be prejudiced against them. Okay? So technically, the court-martial is made up of officers holding rank in the U.S. Volunteers, but they're all regular Army officers. So that's how they're going to get around it. And of course, Frick and his lieutenant colonel are tried and convicted of disobeying orders and cashiered from the Army. But Governor Curtin appeals to President Lincoln, and they're going to be reinstated. To the point where Colonel Frick, when Jubal Early's division was trying to capture the bridge at Wrightsville, Colonel Frick is commanding the militia over there. And he's the one who orders the bridge to be burned. At the end of the Battle of Chancellorsville, by May of '63, most of Humphreys' division is going to be broken up because it's made up of these 9-month men and their enlistments are up. As a parting gesture to Humphreys, somebody we think from a Pennsylvania regiment laid a train of gunpowder from Humphreys' tent and then lit it. Now, of course, it's not connected to anything, so it's just a big fire going up there and that's it. But Humphreys, and I mentioned Humphreys strikes me as being something like Captain Quigg from the Cane Mutiny. And I don't mean that in the sense that he's sitting in his tent trying to figure out who stole the strawberries or anything like that. When Quigg first meets the officers of the Cane, he tells you probably want to know what I'm like. And he tells them, I'm a bookman. And so long as we go by the book, everything's going to be fine. And I think that's what Humphreys is. He's a book guy. So if Frick had gone along with the book and bought his men uniforms, then nothing would have happened. But that's Humphreys' mindset. He's a book guy, in a sense. Although it was also said a soldier stated that Humphreys had the courage of the brightest order, both moral and physical. He united the energy, decision, and intellectual power which characterized him in civil administration. But the Assistant Secretary of War, also know that Humphreys and William T. Sherman were men of distinguished and brilliant profanity. So there's two sides here of General Humphreys. So his division, 3rd Division of the 5th Corps, is going to be discontinued at the end of Chancellorsville. But he's going to be given command of the 2nd Division in the 3rd Corps. And his division consists of 3 brigades. Brigadier General Carr with just over 1,700 men, Colonel Brewster with over 1,800 men, and Colonel Burling with about 1,360 officers and men. He'll also have 2 batteries assigned to the division. Seeley's battery and Turnbull's battery, both batteries of 6 12-pound Napoleon smoothbores. Now Humphreys, on July 1st, with 2 of his brigades and 1 battery of artillery, is west of Emmitsburg, Maryland, when they receive orders to come to Gettysburg. Well, rather than go back through Emmitsburg and up the Emmitsburg Road, he decides to take a back road up here. He's going to get to a junction on the backside of Seminary Ridge, and by the time he gets there, it's after dark. So he's looking at the one map he has with a candle or something like that, and he's telling Lieutenant Colonel Hayden from the 3rd Corps staff that at this intersection, if we take a right, we're going to end up at a place called the Peach Orchard, which is over in that direction. But Hayden says, no, that's not where you're supposed to go. I know where you're supposed to go. So Humphrey finally says, okay, Hayden, you take us to where you think we're supposed to go. So they now start going down, I now think, Black Horse Tavern Road. And as they're going along there, even Hayden is beginning to suspect something's wrong. So Humphrey stops the column. Then he'll ride forward with a portion of a staff, including a Sergeant Diamond from the 6th U.S. Cavalry. And they go up to the owner of the Black Horse Tavern, who informs them there are Confederate troops on the hillside right above the tavern. So it's obvious they're in the wrong place. So Humphreys will get the column turned around to backtrack. Now, this is supposed to be done quietly. But of course, we have a corps of almost, or a division of over 3,500 men at this point. Everybody doesn't get the word. And at least one bugler was sounded during this retreat. And apparently the Confederates either didn't hear it or decided to ignore it. So Humphreys now will come up by the Peach Orchard, and would take position in the fields behind us about 1 o'clock in the morning of July 2nd. About 11 o'clock in the morning, he's going to send the 11th Mass out towards the high ground along the Emmitsburg Road to the Klingel House. And it's his first big barn right in front of us. Okay? And they're going to establish the division skirmish line in the fields on the other side of the Emmitsburg Road. Now, Humphreys' line, as it develops, and actually you can see a good bit from up here. Well, you could. I think some of the trees are in the way.
That's the 26 PA or 11
the 26 PA is out here, and you can see a standing statue of General Humphreys. That's near the right flank of Humphreys' line. I usually place Humphreys' line roughly midway between the Klingel building and the Gadori farm. which is actually masked by this one tree in front of us right now. And his left flank actually is going to rest on U.S. Avenue. So we're right in Humphreys sector right now. But you'll notice from where Humphreys is back here, this ground, of course, slopes up to what's referred to as the Emmitsburg Road Ridge. And that's where the Klingel Farm is. The Emmitsburg Road is just on the other side of that. And that was the problem concerning the 3rd Corps commander, Dan Sickles. Now, there is a strong skirmish line across the road from the peach orchard, even on the night of July 1st, when Sickles is coming into position. He also, at the end of July 1st and into the morning of July 2nd, has John Buford's cavalry helping to patrol his left flank. So while Sickles is a little concerned about this high ground, he's not overly concerned at this point because he's got plenty of warning out there. But then about 11 o'clock in the morning, John Buford receives orders to withdraw from the area and fall back to Westminster, Maryland to help guard the trains. Now, General Meade, the Army commander, had agreed to that on the request of the Chief of Cavalry, General Pleasanton. But with the injunction, if you withdraw Buford, make sure you replace him. And that's one thing Pleasanton's not going to do. So about 12 noon or so, Sickles sees his cavalry screen disappearing. And that's when he sends a patrol onto the other side of the Emmitsburg Road, into Pitcher's Woods. And they run into a division of the Confederate Army, moving into position. So Sickles is now convinced the Confederates are heading for this high ground along the Emmitsburg Road, will plant their artillery up there and show his line behind us. Now keep in mind, his line is supposed to be back on Cemetery Ridge with his left flank on a place called Little Round Top, which is behind us. Okay? Now the Army commander, General Meade, so at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Humphreys receives orders to start to occupy the eastern face here of the Emmitsburg Road Ridge. So he's going to be moving out here with Carr in front, Brewster's 200 yards behind him, and Birney's 200 yards behind that. So Birney's probably near this rail fence right behind us. Okay? General Meade doesn't find out about any of this until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of July 2nd. He's trying to hold a meeting of his Corps commanders at Army headquarters. And that's when he finds out what Sickles has done. So Meade will order the commander of the 5th Corps to go down to Little Round Top and secure that with his troops. He also is now going to go out to the peach orchard to confer with Sickles. And Sickles is trying to explain he was simply moving forward to reach higher ground. Well, from the peach orchard, you've got a nice view of the Appalachian Mountains. And one report is Meade's response was, if you keep going forward, you're going to find even higher ground. Now, Sickles will later make the excuse that he didn't have enough men to man the line Meade gave him back here. The line he takes up is twice as long. And he never explained how he was going to man this line if he couldn't man that one. So you got Humphreys Division over here down to U.S. Avenue. From U.S. Avenue south is going to be Birney's division. Now Graham's brigade will occupy the ground south of U.S. Avenue to the peach orchard itself. But from the south end of the peach orchard down to a place called the Stony Hill, there's going to be a 500-yard gap in the line till the line picks up again to the Stony Hill and runs down to the Devil's Den. Sickles is planning to cover that 500-yard gap with a strong line of skirmishers backed up by artillery on the Wheatfield Road on the other side of us. So that's his plan right now. Humphreys is going to end up fighting his battle out here with only 2 of his 3 brigades. Colonel Burling's going to be designated as reserve for the entire 3rd Corps. So one of the things we're going to find out when we come back down here is what's happening to Burling's brigade. And then we're going to go up towards the crossroads of Sickles Avenue and then over to the position of the 72nd New York. Before we leave though, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
When the two brigades moved this way,
Uh-huh.
do they know whether they were in column or line?
They're going to be in line.
In line. And
at this point.
What about this Plum Run line? Did that obstruct their crossing? Did they have to?
They're going to come through that
straight through it. Yeah.
however they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now also keep in mind, one of the things Sickles had done out here is he had ordered his men to take down all the north-south running fences. So when Humphreys is moving up here, probably most of these fences are not there. What they left were the fences along the roads. And that's going to create bottlenecks later on. But these fences were removed, which is why today you see gaps in them. Because when you're trying to rehabilitate a place like Gettysburg, you've got to decide which day do you want to do it. Do you restore the ground to the way it looked on June 30th or the way it looked on July 4th? And 4 days is going to be a big difference. So when we put these fences up, the decision was made to put gaps in them to help indicate those fences were actually taken down. Okay? So it's a cross between June 30th and July 2nd, in a sense. Okay? Anything else? Okay, let's head down here and find out what happened to Colonel Burling. We had mentioned the 1st Massachusetts, for example, going out towards Emmitsburg Road, and they actually replaced the 4th Maine from Birney's division. Now, their commanding officer, Lieutenant Clark Baldwin, had a bad sore on his left foot. It was actually in the hospital. But when he heard that the Army was on the move and chasing after Lee, he was doing everything he could to get out of the hospital. And the doctors kept refusing him. But apparently he kept pestering them to the point where they finally released him from the hospital, still with a sore on his foot, so he could rejoin his regiment on the field. So he's got this bad sore on his foot, but he's still out here commanding his troops. Now, Colonel Burling, as soon as you get the right card, Colonel Burling, because he's now going to be a reserve, is being ordered around different places. So he actually at one point moved from back here over into Trosel's Woods, the tree line over here to my right. And once in there, he received orders to move out into the open field. So he started to move out into the open field and came under Confederate artillery fire. Some men in the 2nd New Hampshire were hit and injured, and their flagstaff was shot in half. So Burling does a smart thing and moves back into the woods. Then a staff officer from 3rd Corps headquarters comes up and wants to know who's ordered Burling back into the woods. And he said, I did. And they said, that's not where General Sickles wants you. He wants you out in the open field. So he's getting ready to move back out when he receives orders to move over to Rose's Woods on the other side of the Wheatfield Road. And that's when he starts to lose his brigade. 2 regiments are going to be sent up to Graham at the Peach Orchard. The 5th New Hampshire is going to be sent back to Humphreys. 1 regiment is sent down to Colonel Ward in Devil's Den. 1 regiment is going to be sent to Detroit, and shortly after that, the other regiment is sent down. So the 6 regiments in Burling's brigade, all 6 now are in different parts of the line, which means essentially Colonel Burling now has no brigade. So he reports back to General Humphreys for orders. And Humphreys' basic attitude was, well, you don't have a brigade anymore, so I don't have any orders for you. So Burling's just going to kind of hang around and see what happens, basically. He's got no brigade at this point. And Humphreys is not going to like this particular situation, as we're going to find out a little bit later on. But what we're going to do is continue on up U.S. Avenue here. We'll go up to the intersection of U.S. Avenue talk a little bit more about Humphreys line, Daniel Klingel of the Klingel Farm, and then we'll move over to see what the 72nd New York from Bruce's brigade is doing over near the peach orchard.
Who's conveying all these orders?
Dan Sickles, for those who don't know him, was not a West Pointer. And the only high-ranking West Pointer in the 3rd Corps was Andrew Humphreys. But there's no indication that Sickles was asking Humphreys for advice. As far as Sickles was concerned, West Pointers didn't know anything. They didn't know how to fight this war. They were too book-bound and things like that. So Dan Sickles thought he knew more than they did about fighting.
You mean politicians think they can solve everything?
Yep, even back then. Yep. And
Murderers and temporarily. Temporary insanity.
and keep in mind the 3rd Corps, I mentioned the 3rd Corps was supposed to have its left on Little Round Top. And you can just start to see Little Round Top behind us above the trees. As far as we know, Sickles never had any troops on Little Round Top whatsoever. So when the battle starts, the only troops up there are a bunch of guys from the Signal Corps, and that's it. But that's why George Sykes is now going down there with his 11,000 men to secure that high ground as best he can, okay? Daniel Klingel owned the Klingel Farm over here to our right. Now the 1st Mass is out there trying to establish a skirmish line. And also apparently when either the 1st Mass or the 73rd New York went up there, knock on the Klingel door and telling Mr. Klingel he had to get his family to safety because there might be a battle here. But apparently Dan Klingel's initial response was, if I must die, I will die at home. But the family was pretty insistent. So he finally got his family out of there, started back towards Little Round Top, and then remembered he left his best hat back at the house. So the family keeps going. He decides to come back here, where another of his neighbors comes up and tells him there's already fighting going on up here. It's probably skirmish fighting between the lines. So Klingel starts heading back to the rear, is picked up by some signal officers as he's going past the base of Little Round Top. And they take him up to the top so he can help them identify some of the terrain features out here and some of the owners of the property out here. And apparently he's up there with them until the Confederate artillery starts to open fire. And that's when Mr. Klingel decides discretion's the better part of valor, and he heads back to try to rejoin his family. And then we'll come back here sometime after the battle. The 1st Mass would take over the farmhouse, and they start punching holes in the chinks between the logs in order to make fire loops in them. So they're turning that house into a strong point, if they can. So Carr's brigade, when they get up here, is going to have the 26th Pennsylvania on the right, about 300 yards south of the Cadore Farm. And that, of course, is the big barn just to the north of us. So as I said, about midway between Cadore and Klingel. That's Humphreys' right flank. The 11th Mass is going to be next to him near the Rogers house across the road. And at first, Seeley's battery is going to be between the Rogers and the Klingel house, somewhere behind the 11th Mass. The 16th Mass is to the right of the Klingel buildings. The 12th New Hampshire and 11th New Jersey are going to be on this side of the Klingel house, with the 1st Mass and skirmish line out in front of them. And then back behind them, 200 yards in the rear, will be Bruce's brigade, lining up in support. Now, eventually, some of this gets moved around, and Seeley's battery will be moved to the south side of the Klingel Farm, and going in to take Seeley's place will be Turnbow's battery. So Humphreys will have 2 batteries on his front line to help defend it. It's now past 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Confederate artillery opened fire at about 3:30 in the afternoon. And the initial attack is going to come further south, aimed towards the Round Tops. But the attack eventually starts to sweep up along the Gettysburg Road. So you've had Confederate troops attacking the Round Tops, Devil's Den. Then they start to try to penetrate into the Wheatfield, and at about 5:30 or so, Barksdale's brigade, or Kersaw's brigade, is going to launch an attack south of the Peach Orchard, heading for the Wheatfield and a place called the Stony Hill. The Stony Hill is going to put up a resistance. Kershaw has to fall back, call for reserves. As those reserves are coming up, Barksdale's brigade is now going to move across and hit the area north of us in the area of the Peach Orchard itself. So Graham sends a request over here to Humphreys for at least a regiment to come over to help boost this line. So Humphreys is going to send the 72nd New York from Bruce's brigade over to try to help them out. So what we're going to do is come across the road here, eventually we'll cut through the fences and head up towards the Fireman's Monument, which marks the position of the 72nd New York, and talk about their action on that part of the line. Before we leave, though, again, does anybody have any questions so far?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
There was the veterans, when they came back here, they always, I remember hearing about a tree, one tree that was, it was either around here or up at the next fence line, and they always remarked about how they had rallied when they came across the field, and they had rallied by that tree. I know it's gone now, but does that ring a bell?
That doesn't ring a bell. The only witness tree as such, and the most famous tree along here, is the one down where the cars were parked along US Avenue at the Sickles headquarters marker. That tree appears as a sapling in a sketch by Charles Reed, who was a member of Bigelow's battery.
Saved him.
How's that?
Saved him.
He saved Bigelow.
Saved Bigelow? Yeah, he's the guy who saved Bigelow and got the Medal of Honor for it.
Right.
But that sapling is now that big tree by the Sickles headquarters marker.
So there's likely no lead in it. It was
Probably no lead and it was a sapling, oh, you never know.
Can you see it from here?
You can't really see it.
It's a big
Where it's
tree on
that
the right.
big tree right above this group.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the Sickles
in the
tree.
middle of the road.
Right, right. At one point they were talking about, they were talking about putting in this bridle trail, and for some reason they thought that tree interfered with the trail or something. So we got the word they were going to cut it down. And the interpretive division said, now wait a minute, that's the Sickles headquarters tree. That's a witness tree, you can't cut it down. They did,
Is it?
huh?
Is that
No,
tall?
straight down the road.
In the middle of the
That
road.
big tree right down the road.
On the right side of the
On
road.
the right side of the road.
Yeah, right there.
See where the yellow
Between the
sign
two
is?
evergreens.
Yeah, the tree right behind that.
That one?
That one.
When you get back, you'll see an upside down cannon.
Yeah. Sickles headquarters. Yep. And I have one correction to make. It's not the 72nd New York, it's the 73rd New York we're going to be following. Somehow I got those numbers reversed.
New York Excelsior Brigade.
It's all part of the Excelsior Brigade, which fought over here, but they put the monument up over there. Why, I don't know.
Sickles was the original commander of that.
Was the original commander. So I guess anywhere along Sickles' line is appropriate for that. I did have a comment coming up, of course, the Excelsior Brigade is that monument's right straight ahead of us, with the 5 pillars around it and the eagle on top. And the original story was, inside those pillars was supposed to be a bust of Dan Sickles. The story is, though, the sculptor had heard that General Sickles used some of the money from the New York Monuments Commission to take a party trip maybe to New Orleans. And he was so upset about that, he took the bust and threw it in the river. So that's why there's no monument to Sickles on the battlefield. Although in 1895, Congressman Sickles is the one who got passed the authorization creating the Gettysburg National Military Park. So after that, when Sickles was asked, why don't you have a monument on the battlefield, his response always was, the whole battlefield is my monument.
Oh my.
So you can make the argument he almost lost the battle, but he's the one who's going to save the battlefield. And keep in mind, he also got a Medal of Honor for Gettysburg.
He was sort of self-centered.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit, always was. Yeah. But also keep in mind that Medal of Honor comes almost 30 years after the event. So it's not like he gets it right away. There were 64 Medals of Honor eventually issued for Gettysburg. And the last one was to Alonzo Cushing about 2 years ago. And that's probably going to be the last one, I think. His was pretty well documented. So the consensus is he deserved the medal for what he did here.
Not even Jerome Watrous? Doesn't have
Not even who?
Jerome Watrous. He was the artillery officer from the Iron Brigade, 6th Wisconsin, and he did the mule train chase from out to Herbst Woods on the first day.
Oh, the supply wagons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With mules.
With mules.
Yeah.
They had the supply wagon there.
You don't think he has a shot?
Well, no, probably not. One of the questions people ask sometimes is, how are these guys supplied on the field? I don't know in every case, but on July 1st, Watrous, in charge of the ammunition train for the Iron Brigade, the 1st Brigade of the 1st Division of the 1st Corps, against orders, brought his train up onto McPherson's Ridge and was throwing cases of ammunition out the back, jumping out with a hook and opening them. So guys from the Iron Brigade were just rushing back and grabbing handfuls of ammunition and going back to the front. That's a case where he's going to worry about the accounting later on. His men need ammunition now, and they're going to get it. You know.
He ended up getting a fine thank you from Hancock.
Bob, yeah. Have you ever seen the movie From Here to Eternity? From Here to Eternity, it's about Pearl Harbor, basically. And when the Japanese planes are coming in, I guess the ordnance sergeant at one of the Army bases refuses to release ammunition without the proper authority. And the Japanese are strafing the base while he's doing this. I mean,
Pretty good authority.
some of the mindset just is, you know, and so sometimes Hollywood gets things kind of right with mentality. There's another great Clint Eastwood movie, Heartbreak Ridge, where they have, it's a drill, preparation drill, and he's trying to ask his commander for night vision goggles. And the commander, who used to come from supply, is telling Eastwood, your guys don't have the authorization for this. And then the general comes up, and you can imagine what Eastwood says to the general about his men having to put a requisition in for equipment they should already have. So it doesn't change. You know, the Army mentality doesn't change over the years. You know. But let's head down and see what the 73rd New York is up to. Now, we're not going to be here too long, but you do get a good view of the terrain up here. Behind us is going to be Little Round Top, and the big hill, of course, is Big Round Top. Rose's Woods is down here to the right of where these cars are going, and Troce's Woods is right behind us. Just on the other side of Rose's Woods is a place called the Wheatfield. And then we've got the peach orchard directly south of us. As I mentioned, there's a 500-yard gap from the south edge of the peach orchard down to the Stony Hill, which is And unfortunately, from here, the best mark of the Stony Hill is behind this big tree below us. But it's back in Rose's woods behind us. So right now, you have fighting going on down near Little Round Top in Devil's Den, and Confederate forces moving south of the Peach Orchard and engaged with Union troops at the Stony Hill, which means they're actually now behind the Union line here along the Emmitsburg Road. So while that's going on, now coming across the field is Barksdale's Mississippians. 3 of his regiments are heading right for us. The 21st Mississippi peeled off and headed right for the Peach Orchard itself. And that part of the Union line is now starting to crumble and fall back. But the 73rd New York came over here in support of the 114th Pennsylvania. And the 73rd, when they get in position, can't fire because the 114th is in front of them down here near the Shurfy farm, contending with Barksdale's men coming straight at them. They are finally able to fire once the 114th clears its front. And then the 73rd will open fire on Barksdale's men at a range of about 100 yards, which is probably from here, I would guess, just the other side of the Emmitsburg Road, roughly. I'm not that good at judging distance, but that's my guess. And it was also said, they were 100 yards behind the 114th. They fired at Barksdale at close range, which means probably as Barksdale's men are coming over those fences, that's when the 73rd is going to open fire. They didn't actually define what close range meant, but that's probably as close as they're going to let them go before they open fire. But now, over here to the left, the Mississippians are among the buildings of the Wentz house. So the 73rd is now in danger of being outflanked. So Lieutenant Colonel Barnes of the regiment is going to get shot. Major Michael Barnes, 2 color bearers are shot. Major Michael Barnes is riding behind the line, trying to steady the men when he receives an order to rejoin Humphreys. And it's not clear who the order is coming from. So now the 73rd will pull out, go back the way they came to rejoin their brigade on the back side of the Emmitsburg Road Ridge. Barksdale continues his advance, and now he's going to aim towards the left flank of Humphreys, which is primarily Bruce's brigade on the backside of the hill. So once we leave here, we're going to talk about Bruce's brigade and why he is wondering why Carr along the road isn't sending any help down for his brigade. Before we leave those, does anybody have any questions?
Was it the 114th that stood up and gave them a volley?
It's going to be right here along the road. Yeah, the 114th was actually in among the Shurfy buildings and opened fire on Barksdale. And they had to withdraw under pressure.
Where did they go?
The 114th is going to start heading back towards the Cemetery Ridge line. And at the end of the day, all of the 3rd Corps is going to be rallying down about where the Pennsylvania Monument is today, in that general area. Okay?
Plum Run line.
Behind Plum Run, right.
So you mentioned the Wentz house. Is that the house that's been missing and there's only a foundation?
Only a foundation over here. Right. That's it. So you can kind of understand why the guys in the Peach Orchard are falling back, because there's fighting behind them. And if the Confederates capture the Wheatfield, that means their retreat's going to be cut off. So that's demoralizing just in itself. So there's fighting over there. You got Barksdale now coming in on them, and they can probably see other Confederate units lined up ready to come across. Because once the Peach Orchard starts to collapse, you have Barksdale coming in. And then after Barksdale comes in, Wampus Brigade behind him is going to come down straight down the Wheatfield Road itself. heading towards the Wheatfield. So Barksdale's still over here, fighting it out. But now next to Barksdale is going to be Anderson's division of A.P. Hill's Corps. And his divisions, his brigades are lined up one after the other.
Is that Posey? And
That's going to be Posey at the left end. Initially coming in, it's going to be Wilcox, then Lang, Wright's brigade, and then Posey's. So 4 more Confederate brigades range along the line, getting ready to move in. And they're going to start to move in an echelon pattern, which means Wilcox will start the advance. Once he's engaged with Union troops and has them occupied, Lang's brigade will move in. Once he's done the same thing, Wright's brigade will move in. And what they're trying to do is get Union reserves down here, so eventually they open up a gap in the line. And one of those other brigades can move through the gap and maybe start to effect a withdrawal of Union troops. That's the whole idea of this echelon movement, okay? And in fact, General Meade, it's at this point that General Meade will pull troops off Culp's Hill to reinforce this line as best he can. And because of troops moving back and forth along Cemetery Ridge, there is going to be a gap in the line that Wright's George Brigade is heading for. Okay? So even though once we're done with Humphreys, the fighting's still going to go on. The fighting started about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 7:30, it starts to die off here because 7:30 back then is sunset. So, but that's one of the things that makes the second day so confusing, is you have a lot going on over a mile stretch, over 2 miles almost, in a space of 3.5 hours. So we do try to compartmentalize it and talk just about Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the Wheatfield, the Peach Orchard, things like that. But all those places are interconnected. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other ones as well. Okay? Anything else?
you said somebody else was going to go through a gap, but wasn't it Wilcox that went out in 1st Minnesota, Matt?
1st Minnesota is going to meet him. But coming around to the 1st Minnesota is going to be Willard's Brigade from the 2nd Corps. Now, Willard's Brigade will go in to stop Barksdale. But the 111 New York on the right will have time to also turn and fire into Wilcox's flank and rear. So they're helping out the 1st Minnesota.
And Rhodes was severely depleted by then, after the first day.
Oh, there you go. I didn't know they were over there today.
Well, they're 5 hours early in opening fires.
Yeah, there you go. Now also keep in mind, you see the smoke over there? When those guns fire today, they only fire a 1/4 pound powder charge. Okay? Back in the Civil War, the 12-pound Napoleon smoothbores had a 2.5 pound powder charge. Wow. And the rifled guns had a 1 pound charge. So it's going to be a lot more smoke from one gun than you see over there. On the afternoon of July 1st, the Confederate bombardment preceding picket charge is going to start in the Peach Orchard and roll along the line, but the Confederates are firing, the estimate is they're firing between 2 and 4 rounds a minute from 140 guns. And so those guns produce so much smoke, you can't see anything out here. And the Union gunners, in trying to fire back, the only targets they have are the flashes through the smoke when the Confederate guns go off. And that's it. Yeah.
What you miss entirely, though, is when that gun goes off, you'd hear the projectile ripping through the air. You hear like that.
You can hear it.
And if that shell
Right.
goes off on top of you, it's like an ear-splitting crack where the shell bursts.
But
And you miss
because,
that altogether,
right.
this reenactor stuff. Yeah.
but because of all the smoke out here on July 3rd, and we're kind of talking about another part of the battle, But with all the smoke out here on July 3rd, the Union cannoneers back here on Cemetery Ridge, for the most part, are following General Hunt's orders not to fire unless they have a good target. So in general, the Union artillery back here along Cemetery Ridge behind us and up on Cemetery Hill are not opening fire because they don't have good targets. The only guns consistently firing are the 5 batteries of the 2nd Corps on the northern end of Cemetery Ridge. And that's why they're taking such heavy losses. Because with nobody else firing, that's who the Confederates are focused on at this point. So the other Union batteries save the long-range ammunition, and when the smoke clears and the infantry comes across the field, that's when they can start to open fire again. Okay?
So was it Wofford that cleared all the artillery units from down off the Wheatfield Road?
Well, they're going to start pulling out as soon as Barksdale gets up here. But here, Wofford is not going to help. But he's going to come down astride the Wheatfield Road. That's a signal for Confederate units on the edge of the Wheatfield to renew or try to attack the west face of Little Round Top. But those units have been fighting for about 2 hours. So the commands are somewhat jumbled up. Of course, you got some officers down, you got casualties in the units, and the 1st Pennsylvania Reserve is now coming off, or a brigade of Pennsylvania Reserves is now coming off the north slope of Little Round Top. Plus the 6th Corps is now starting to show up. And so they're going to blunt that last Confederate attack, and Wofford's going to be ordered back towards the other side of the Wheatfield. And he's ordered back by his Corps commander, James Longstreet, who was up there making a forward reconnaissance himself at this point.
Sees the odds now and
right.
Changes up.
Yep. Okay.
Was the majority of this regiment, were they actually firemen?
They were actually firemen.
They actually wore hats like that?
Well, somebody said that's more late 18th century than pre-Civil War. But it's the idea to honor these guys as firemen. And so a lot of people, I don't know as many today. We have a FEMA train station down in Emmitsburg. Before FEMA took it over, it's simply called the Fire Academy, because that's where a lot of firemen went for training. And so a lot of them came out here to see the statue, whether they're from New York or not. Now it's FEMA. And so I don't know if we get as many people out here as we did before or not.
But they were all fire companies, and then they all volunteered in mass?
For the most part. Maybe not in mass, but a good many of them.
Most of them all already known each other before the war?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Not unusual in any regiment up here. A lot of these regiments come from the same county, the same geographical area. So there's a lot of neighbors, cousins, brothers. The 151st Pennsylvania is known as the school teacher regiment, because almost all the officers were school teachers from the same general area. You know, so they know each other.
Yeah. Daniel Webster, was that the same group?
The Daniel Webster Regiment from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And they were just nicknamed after Daniel Webster. Yeah.
What's the story about Zouaves?
How's that?
What's the story about Zouaves?
The Zouaves? The Zouaves actually started out as native troops in the North African native units in the French army, and they wore their colorful native uniforms. The French eventually allowed Europeans to join those North African units, and eventually became all European, wearing the fancy dress. In the 1850s, a New York militia officer named Elmer Ellsworth was touring France, saw these uniforms, and said, that's what my militia unit needs to wear. So he outfitted his militia in those Zouave uniforms. They became nationally known for their parade ground maneuvers. So he took them on a national tour, and other militia units said, that's what we want. So the Zouave refers to the uniform. They weren't specially trained or anything like that. At the beginning of the Civil War, they had the red fezzes, the red pantaloons, all that. Within a year, most of them were losing a lot of that stuff.
They made good targets,
And
right?
they made good targets. Plus, the pants and the fezzes weren't practical for other reasons.
There's
And
a
not all
famous
their pants
quote
were
where
baggy.
Somebody said by 1862 or 63 they looked like shabby pachas.
Something like that, yeah. So they adopted a more traditional looking uniform, but retained the nickname of Zouaves. Right. Now, one Pennsylvania unit assigned to headquarters duty basically kept the basic Zouave uniform, but they're back at headquarters. So they look pretty nice at headquarters. Yeah, they were to go back out in the field, they probably changed them to something else. Okay? Let's head back towards Humphreys Line. We're going to stop again at the intersection with US Avenue and talk about the 105th Pennsylvania. Even though they're not part of Humphreys Division, they play a role with Humphreys here on the battle. The monument at the top of the road over here is for the 105th Pennsylvania. Now, they're not part of Humphreys Division. They're down here as part of Birney's Division. But they're playing a role down here in a sense with Humphreys Division at this point. They actually formed across the Gettysburg Road. And as Barksdale is coming in, they're going to advance to try to stop them. They actually counterattacked all the way to the Sherfy farm. And Colonel Gregg of the regiment said that they charged 8 to 10 times against Barksdale's men. And he said the boys fought like demons. Now they're going to pay a price for that. The 105th came in with 272 officers and men. They reported total casualties of 8 killed, 115 wounded, and 9 missing. Just over 48% of what they brought in. So almost half the regiment goes down trying to counterattack to either stop or at least slow down Barksdale's advance. But now the 73rd retreated back this way and rejoined Bruce's brigade on the back slope of the Gettysburg Road Ridge. Keep in mind that Carr's brigade is on top of the ridge, more to our left. So we're going to come back here and talk a little bit about Bruce's brigade, about how you can't always judge where a regiment was by where the monuments are. And then from there, we're going to head up to talk about why Carr cannot help out Brewster back here. And again, you might move a little bit closer if you want to. Humphreys is going to stay in his official report. I was about to throw somewhat forward the left of my infantry and engage the enemy with it when I received orders from General Birney to throw back my left and form a line oblique to and in rear of the one I then held. So Humphreys felt at this point he could advance to try to stop Barksdale, but instead he's now getting orders from Birney, who's in command of the 3rd Corps, because Sickles has been wounded, to throw back his left entirely to try to stop Barksdale's attacks. So instead of advancing, Humphreys now has to try to pull back his left to cover for the attack. So Barksdale is going to be coming in from this general direction. The red barn's the Sherfy barn across the road, and Barksdale is now coming in, aiming for Humphreys' left flank, but his line of direction is going to take him back towards the Pennsylvania Monument, that big monument with the dome and the angel on top. Okay? Now, Captain Caswell McClellan was told to get his men back into line and keep them there. They saw General Birney riding in the opposite direction from where everybody else was supposed to be. And there was some fear that Graham's men now retreating back from the peach orchard are going to infect, especially Bruce's men back here, and kind of sweep them back with them, back towards the line. So they're doing everything they can to hold the men in place. In the 120th New York, for example, Bruce's brigade, when the front regiments gave way, and in front of them, the 120th is going to start to open fire. And they brought Barksdale's brigade to a halt. Brewster was unhorsed with the file closers. Now, when these guys go into a line, what they're talking about is the regiment's going to be in two lines or two ranks, a front rank and a rear rank. The captains of each company are supposed to be on the right flank of the front line. The first sergeant is right behind him. And then the other sergeants and lieutenants formed a third line called file closers. And their job was to make sure the men in the first two ranks maintained their relative positions. So the colonel is going to be right with the file closers, trying to direct the men. Also back there, Humphreys and Lieutenant Colonel Cornelius Westbrook were behind the line. And Westbrook especially is mad at Colonel Carr up here about why he doesn't send anybody down here to help them out. Now, in most of the rest of the Excelsior Brigade, these regiments don't say a lot about what they did out here. In fact, most of the reports are less than a page long. And when you write a short report like that, it kind of means, some people think it means one of two things. Either you didn't do a lot, or something happened out here you didn't want to say anything about. And that's the impression we're getting from Bruce's brigade. They are putting up something of a fight, but it's not very long before the brigade starts to break and fall back towards the rear. So Bruce's brigade apparently is going to be fighting, but not for very long before they pull out of here. Now, of course, years after the war, the regiments come back to put up their regimental monuments. And the 120th New York put up their monument right here above us, this very tall, almost castle-like structure. Now, along with that, a lot of the regiments also put up flank markers to show where the ends of the line were, okay? At the time this monument was put up in the 1880s, the chief historian here was a man named John Batchelder. And because of all the correspondence he had, in some sense, Batchelder thought he knew more than the individual regiments did about where they were. So there was an argument between him and the veterans of the 120th over where the monument should go. And the veterans are going to win the argument and got their monument placed where they wanted them. So now came the question of the flank markers. Well, one of the flank markers for the 120th is out in this field, kind of hidden by that tall grass in the middle of the field. And depending on how you stand up here, you can see that marker, okay? The other flank marker is right here. Now, since they're fighting against the Confederates and Barksdale is coming in from that direction, you would think this is the right flank marker and that's the left flank marker. It's not. The right flank marker is out there. This is the left flank, which means if you go by the flank markers, the 120th is facing that way, with the Confederates coming from that direction. So the 120th has their backs to them. And we think that was Batchelder's attempt to get back at them for losing
Where to put the
monument. That's the only reason we can think. Because the 120th is putting up a pretty good fight here, which means they had to be facing their enemy and not with their backs to it. So he may have intended to be that when they started to retreat, they turned around and then the flags were reversed that way.
So didn't the veterans notice that and vociferously argue with them about it?
You know, I've never seen anything specifically about the flank markers.
Yeah.
But you're right, when the veterans felt the monument was in the wrong place, they told you about it.
Yeah.
We know today, for example, the 8th Ohio monument is in the wrong place. and the 8th Ohio probably fought further into town. We think about where McDonald's is today. That's where the line was. There's a New York regiment, the 154th, that has their monument on Howard Avenue and the Carlisle Road.
Right.
Right, the Carlisle Road. Okay? Right on the front of the main monument, they basically say we didn't fight here, but 75 yards further north.
Yeah.
And you go 75 yards further north, and they have an advanced marker
Right.
to where they actually fought.
Okay.
The battlefield commissioner said the monuments had to be on the battle line. Not necessarily where you fought, but where you started from. And they claimed Howard Avenue is where the regiment started from. So that's why they put the monument there. Also, the monument of the 14th Brooklyn should probably be further out in the field than what it is. But Batchelor said that's where it goes. And again, once they unveiled the monument, the veteran said it's in the wrong place. They could even argue among themselves. When they dedicated the 20th Maine Monument on Little Round Top, one of the chief speakers was Joshua Chamberlain, who commanded the regiment. And in his speech, he said the monument's in the wrong place. And he was on the Monument Commission itself. So we're not exactly sure where Chamberlain is coming from at that point. But I'll probably have to do some more research to see if they said anything about the flag markers. Yeah, and add that to the next program.
How would they let
next
get
show.
away with something like that?
I know, I know.
Did Chamberlain think his monument should have been farther south on Vincent Spur?
You know, I don't think he specifically said. We think his line was back where the stone wall is today, and where the path cuts through the stone wall above the monument. That's probably where the flags were. Because where the monument is, we know what happened is the captain of the color company took some volunteers out in front to bring in some of the wounded. But when he did, he took the flags with him. So the flag bearer is where the monument is, and he steps off, he's got a 20-foot drop. So that's probably not where the flags were. A little bit further up the hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
And keep in mind, on July 2nd, 1863, that stone wall was not there. So Chamberlain's guys do not fight from behind a stone wall. They put the walls up that night in case there's fighting on July 3rd. And when the battlefield commissioners decided to reconstruct those walls, one of the veterans objecting to it was Joshua Chamberlain. And that's a battle he lost. Okay?
Yeah, because the wall was there.
Yep, the wall is still there. Now, Colonel Carr, for his part, said, "At that time, I have no doubt that I could have charged on the rebels and driven them in confusion, for my line was still perfect and unbroken, and my troops in the proper spirit to the performance of such a task." So even though Brewster seems to be falling back here, Carr up on the road thinks he can still mount a countercharge and stop Wilcox, who's coming up against him. But as we mentioned, Westbrook couldn't understand why Carr's not helping him. What we're going to do is come back past this fence line, go up towards Seeley's battery, where we have a view of what Carr's seeing on the other side of the road, and that will explain why he's not sending any help down here to Brewster or the 120th New York.
Are those paintings like right out in front of Long Street?
Yeah, they're in Pittsford Woods. Yep. Let me just start to give you a general idea of what's going on here. So here's where we might want to move in a little bit. Okay, here's Here's the Emmitsburg Road right here. Okay, and let me make sure. This is the Klinger farm down here. So we're on the edge of the Klinger farm right now. And here's Seeley's battery. Okay? So they're starting with the 3rd Michigan and 69 Pennsylvania down on the other side of the peach orchard. Okay? So coming in here, you see Kershaw's brigade, which is moving past the south end of the peach orchard, heading towards the Stony Hill. Behind him is Sims' brigade, who's going to move up in support eventually. And over here is Barksdale's brigade, who's moving in partially towards here, but more north of where we are right now. And then Barksdale eventually will turn and head towards the back side of Humphreys' line. So that's the general situation up here. Okay? And this will give you a better idea of Carr's brigade line when everything starts. Again, here's the Emmitsburg Road. So we're going to be starting with the 11th New Jersey, Seeley's Battery, 12th New Hampshire, 16 Mass, the 11th Mass, and the 26th Pennsylvania on the right. The 1st Mass is still out here basically on the skirmish line. Okay?
Where would that be out there on the field approximately?
On the, probably down in the dip a little bit,
Oh.
along a fence line out there. Actually, if you go further north up here, along the trail you can follow from the Virginia Monument up to the angle, you pass the monument for the 1st Mass skirmish line.
Oh.
And that'll give you a better idea.
They're pretty far out there.
Well, they're on the skirmish line.
Yeah.
Their job was to keep an eye out on the enemy troops.
Yeah.
And when the enemy line starts to advance, that skirmish line would lay down suppressing fire, fall back to the skirmish reserve, which was probably near the Emmitsburg Road, lay down another suppressing fire, and then finally fall back into the main line. Now, while they're doing that, and the Confederates are advancing, the Confederates have their own skirmish line out in front of the main line. And their job, of course, is to drive back the Union skirmish line. But again, once they start to close with the enemy, their skirmish line will fall back into the main line. Okay? So that's how all that's going to work. So the 11th Mass is down here on the left. They're the left end of Humphreys' line. The color guard was going to be posted 20 feet in front of the line for inspiration. So you had the flags out in front. Because they're pressing now from Barksdale, the regiment's going to have to start to withdraw. And when they started to withdraw, they forgot about the color guards. So it's still out there.
Inspiring everyone.
It's just trying to inspire everybody. Lieutenant Schonover was sent out to bring him in, and he found the color guards still in position. They hadn't moved, despite the oncoming fire. They changed front on the left of the Klinger house, which means instead of facing that way, they changed to face that way. That's where the attack's coming. Colonel McAllister of the regiment is going to order the regiment to fire by rank, which means probably the rear rank's going to fire and then the front rank. That'll give the rear rank time to reload and then fire. Keeps a more constant fire that way. But eventually he's going to have to fall back to the rear. A ball is going to hit him in the left leg, and a piece of artillery shell hit him in the right foot. One of his aides, Major Philip J. Kearney, is going to be hit in the knee and die of his wounds on August 7th. For the real Civil War enthusiast here, Major Philip Kearney was the nephew of General Phil Kearney, killed at Chantilly in September of 1862. So that's where the relationship is.
Nephew. Huh?
His nephew. Now, also serving on Humphreys' staff is Adolfo Fernandez Caveda, also known as Frederick Caveda. He was born in 1832 in Cuba. His father was a Cuban merchant and his mother was from Philadelphia. He also is going to have a younger brother. And the father died in Cuba. The mother came back to Philadelphia and raised her kids there. So when the war broke out, they're going to join up. And the brother here at Gettysburg is going to be commanding the 114th Pennsylvania down by the Surfy House before he's wounded and captured. But they're going to be up here at Seeley's Battery. And they saw the Zouaves down by the Surfy House. And they're going to report the breeze blowing from the southward carried the heavy sulfur smoke in clouds along the ground, at times concealing everything from my view. Captain Caveda also reported our battery, meaning Seeley's Battery, opened. Our troops rose to their feet. The crash of artillery and the cheering rattle of our musketry was staggering. And added to the noise on our side, the advancing roar and theirs and cheer of the enemy's masses coming on like devils incarnate. Now, after the war, both brothers are going to serve in council positions in Cuba. When the 10-year war broke out, the Cuban War for Independence in 1868, they're going to join the Cuban Army. Frederick actually commands all Cuban forces on the island before he was captured in 1871 and executed by the Spaniards. Adolfo Alfred is killed in action on December 18, 1871. So two brothers who are heroes in two different countries at this point. But Humphreys himself is up here at Seeley's Battery, walking among the guns and giving directions to the cannoneers, oblivious, it was said, to the murderous missiles that were felling the very gunners around him. Lieutenant C himself is going to get hit in the chest and severely wounded. And Lieutenant Robert James is going to take over command. The battery at this point is going to have to be withdrawn to the rear. So they're trying to hitch up the horses and get the battery out of here, heading back again towards the Pennsylvania Monument. The 5th New Jersey is a little bit closer to the Surfy Farm. So what we're going to do is come down the path here, back to Sickles Avenue, go behind the Klinger House, talk about the 5th New Jersey, and continue on down to Turnbow's Battery. And once we leave Turnbow's Battery, we'll cross the Emmitsburg Road, go under a nice shade tree by the Rogers House location, and we'll talk about the right flank of Humphreys' line and where he's going to end up at the end of the battle. But again, before we leave here, does anybody have any questions?
I have two questions. Why is this little section here fenced off from the...
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. And the other thing...
Now, a part of this might be a holdover from when this was a private residence. And this was more fenced off at one point, and one of our maintenance people had a horse and would graze the horse out here. And every once in a while, I would do this program, the horse would come up to see what we were doing. And one time he grabbed my knapsack. I guess he didn't like us up here. He grabbed my knapsack and threw it in the air. So, I think somebody caught that on video or something. I'm not sure. So that might be a holdover, and they just haven't taken it down yet.
Who took over the Corps command after Sickles was...
Sickles was wounded, so at that point, David Birney,
Birney took
the senior division commander, would take over.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Yeah. He'd actually placed Hancock in charge of the 3rd Corps.
Well, eventually, because of the situation down here, late in the afternoon, Hancock's placed in charge of all the troops down here, which means he's in charge of the 2nd Corps troops down here, the 3rd Corps, the 5th Corps, and probably some of the 6th Corps troops are up here as well. Although General Sedgwick, commanding the 6th Corps, is on the field. He was at this conference Meade had at 3 o'clock. He rode in time to tell Meade the 6th Corps was about an hour or 2 hours behind him. So he's on the field, but Hancock's got control of all the forces on this end of the field. And that's when he turned command of the rest of the 2nd Corps over to John Gibbon. But at the end of the day, Hancock reports back as commander of the 2nd Corps. Okay?
He was not happy with the position he was put in.
No.
His corps was fine.
It's been said he was ambitious, but probably not this ambitious. You're right, to take command of a corps that was solid in position and then take command of one that's basically falling apart. He didn't particularly like that, but that's what Meade wanted him to do, and so Hancock didn't have any choice but to do it. But at the end of the day, all the commandos are put back in place, and Hancock is command now of just the 2nd Corps, which is what he wants. Yeah. On July 3rd, of course, Hancock goes down wounded. Gibbon goes down wounded. And at headquarters, there is a Brigadier General William Hayes, who had been captured at Chancellorsville, released, and is now rejoining the Army of the Potomac. But when he first rode in, Meade didn't have any place for him. So the guys that's kind of hanging around the headquarters, when Hancock and Gibbon both go down, Meade decides to make William Hayes commander of the 2nd Corps. Much to the displeasure of the 3rd Division commander, Alexander Hayes. And Alexander wanted to make sure everybody knew that the General Hayes in command of the 2nd Corps was not him. It was the other guy, who a lot of people felt was not doing the best job. So Meade probably would have been better to put Alexander in charge and put William in charge of the 3rd Division. But in that space of time, all this information's coming in. Meade's got more in his mind than this. And William Hayes just happens to be there, so he says, you're it. Okay? Anything else?
The guns facing the direction that they would have been?
Yes. Yeah.
Even though the Confederates are coming from this direction?
Barksdale is kind of hitting behind us here,
Okay.
but in front of us is Wilcox.
Okay, another wave.
So these guns are trying to take care of Wilcox's guys more than anything else.
8th, 10th, and 11th Alabama.
Yeah, but because of Barksdale coming in here and Brewster falling back, and now these orders Humphreys getting from Birney to fall back, this part of the line is going to have to fall back under orders and under some pressure. Okay?
Could you say a little bit about the tremendous fight that the 11th New Jersey put up right in through here?
Well, we did it a little bit.
Yeah.
Talked about them facing Barksdale. They are going to put up quite a fight.
Right.
But then they're up against, it's again 1 regiment against 3 regiments.
Right.
So they're going to have to start to fall back. And probably also under orders, because Humphreys under orders to fall back as well. So this is the start of his fighting withdrawal at this point. But the troops his division is not disintegrating. His regiments are staying intact and falling back in the best formation they can. So that's one reason he's proud of his division up here on July 2nd.
They stayed in organized.
They're staying in formation as best they can. And for the most part, by staying in formation, you actually have less casualties than when you try to break and run. And especially less casualties in capture. Because by staying in formation, on occasion you can stop, turn around, and fire on your pursuers. And that can help slow them down. Okay? So the division is staying basically intact as they're falling back here. And that's one important point to remember. Okay? Anything else?
I have a question for you as well.
Okay. Now, the 5th New Jersey had initially relieved the 63rd Pennsylvania out in front of the skirmish line, helping cover the division. So they're still out there when the attack comes. And Seeley's going to be a few paces in the rear of the center of the left wing. And so they're engaged first and are driven in. The road up on the right covering Seeley's battery, firing in retreat. So they're going to rally by Seeley's guns, open fire, try to buy time for Seeley to get out, and they're going to start to retreat. And they're going to be passing by the left flank of the 11th New Jersey as they're falling back. Now, Joseph Carr is still going to maintain that notwithstanding my apparent critical position, I could and would have maintained my position, but for an order received direct from Major General Birney. And Birney once called her far back on a line between basically the Emmitsburg Road and a line running down towards Little Round Top. So he probably means the rail fence just behind us. And it's the post and rail fence back there. That's what he's talking about. And if you follow that line down, that would take you back towards the Round Tops. So Humphreys and Carr are now being ordered to fall back to that line and form a new line from the Emmitsburg Road. So Barksdale is still heading back in that direction. Wilcox is advancing up here, and beside him is Perry's brigade under Colonel Lang, the Floridians. So they're now starting to come into line as well. This echelon attack is now starting to achieve what it wants. The 12th New Jersey is going to have to retreat. And Carr sent a staff officer over to Captain Langley, who was in command. And he was told, can you make your regiment understand this order? And he responded, yes, or can he carry out this order? And he said, yes, I can, if I can make them understand the order. Now, with all the sound of battle going on and everything else, Langley felt he couldn't just shout the order because his men might not hear it. So he went to each individual company commander and told them what they were going to do. That at a certain bugle call, they were going to start to retreat. Now, anything can happen in that time. One of those guys could be shot and killed before he tells anybody else. Langley could be shot and killed before he gives the order. Nothing like that fortunately happened. And when the order came, the signal came, the 12th New Hampshire was able to pull out of here as a unit. So Langley was able to tell everybody, and they pulled out of here again under orders and in formation, trying to head for the rear. Colonel Brewster himself is going to have his horse killed. As he was walking off the field, he's walking off the field with Captain Thomas Rafferty of the 71st New York. A private in the 71st, for some reason, retrieved Brewster's bridle and gave it to him. So Brewster is unhorsed and he's heading back to the rear. What we're going to do is continue down here towards Turnbow's battery. And once there, I'll explain why the guns of the monument are probably not where the guns were during the battle. Again, probably another example of how you can't place the regiment because of the monument. If you think the guns here represent Turnbow's battery, you'd probably fail in military tactics. Turnbow's battery is actually on the other side of the road, right on the crest of the ridge up there, where he can see the Confederates coming in. And this case is now you're talking about Perry's brigade of Floridians coming in under Colonel Lang. Okay? So the enemy's also advancing on his left. That's going to be Wilcox. who is also now starting to turn around a little bit and head in the direction of the Pennsylvania Monument. Okay? So Turnbow now is going to be ordered by Humphreys to withdraw. And they're going to withdraw by prolong. Now what that means on the back of each gun is a 9-foot prolong rope. And you place one end of that rope in the trail of the gun and place the other one on the pintle hook of the limber. And by doing that, you can still load the gun and fire while you're retreating. So that's one reason they're doing it. And they're doing that firing canister at the Confederates. So withdrawing and firing canister and withdrawing again. They're going to get back to Plum Run behind us by these thick bushes right below us. And that's going to stop them a little bit. They actually had to leave 4 guns and 2 caissons on the field. They couldn't get them off at that time. Also, they're going to lose, and that's a 400-yard run from the Emmitsburg Road back to the Plum Run. So that 400 yards they're firing by prolong at the enemy. But they're going to lose 8 men killed, 14 wounded, and they're going to lose roughly 45 horses in the retreat. That's one reason they can't get all the equipment off the field, because they've lost those horses. But like everybody else now, they're heading back towards the high ground, somewhat high ground, around the Pennsylvania Monument. Now also back there, you got Daniel's battery setting up. You have the 1st Minnesota come into line. Getting ready to move down here is Willett's New York Brigade. And also to the left of that, on this lower part of the ridge, Colonel McGilvery is trying to get an artillery line set up to close a gap in the Union line. So again, a lot's going on up here. So while Humphreys trying to withdraw up here, that's probably about the same time that the 9th Mass is fighting out with Barksdale down by the Trosa farm. So everybody's trying to get out of here, but in some cases, they're also trying to buy time for other Union troops to set up and meet this advance. What we're going to do is cross the Emmitsburg Road, go into the shade of those trees across the road. We have another good view of Humphreys' line north of us, but also a good line of the whole Union line north of here, and our troops from the main line behind us are coming out to try to stop the Confederate advance.
On the other side.
On the other side,
yeah. But that's the continuation of their farm lane, right?
Yeah.
That would they just enclose over there?
Well, I don't know. They were pretty close to the. They were pretty close to the Tawny
Yeah.
River.
Yeah.
Now, right across from us, is a standing statue of General Humphreys, right on the Emmitsburg Road. And it's reported that Humphreys supervises cars pull out from the Emmitsburg Road, so So that's probably why the statue is here. He is up here on the front line, supervising the withdrawal of Cole's brigade from up here. And his horse is going to get hit 7 times, and 1 time by a shell fragment. Now, ours are coming up here. Humphreys is going to lose his horse because of all those wounds. But Private James Diamond from the 6th U.S. Cavalry, one of those guys who went with Humphreys out towards the Black Horse Tavern on July 1st, is going to offer General Humphreys this horse, and Humphreys is going to take it. Diamond then, in the smoke of the battle, disappears, and Humphreys can't find him. To Humphreys' credit, he is going to contact the Surgeon General of the United States for any information he had on Sergeant Diamond. Now, we know when Diamond gave Humphreys the horse, he was reportedly already wounded. And we think he may have been wounded a 2nd time and killed on the field. The problem for Private Diamond was that the staff of Humphreys Division thought he was being carried on the muster rows of the 6th U.S. Cavalry. And the 6th U.S. Cavalry thought he was being carried on the muster rows of the division staff. So Diamond's one of those guys who fell through the cracks. We think today he's buried as an unknown soldier in the National Cemetery. But Humphreys did try to find out what happened to him the first opportunity he had. It was said that Humphreys was not only inspiring the men, but he was also a leader at this point. He also is reported to have said that 20 times did I bring my men to a halt and face about. Myself and Harry, his son, and others of my staff forcing the men to it. So Humphreys again is trying to get his men to stop on occasion, turn around, and fire to slow down their pursuers. The Provost Marshal of the division said that Humphreys was without a superior on the field of battle, for fire, and yet an absolute equipoise. Another soldier wrote that Humphreys showed himself a hero and a leader. Captain Amos Bartlett of the 12th New Hampshire is going to report, to unflinchingly face danger and death is one thing, but to turn your back thereto and stand firm and unshaken is a different and more difficult thing, that only the bravest of the best disciplined troops can be relied upon to do it. Now, coming out north of us from the 2nd Corps line is going to be the 82nd New York and the 15th Mass. They're going to go into position on the north side, the other side of the Cadore barn. So they're out there along the road. Brown's battery is going to advance from the main line and go to the right and rear of the 15th Mass. So again, they're just north of the Cadore house. Thomas's battery mentioned is going to be near the Pennsylvania Monument with the 1st Minnesota in support. Weir's battery is going to go into line just south of the Cadore barn with the 19th Maine in support. The 42nd New York and 19th Pennsylvania are going to be sent out from the main line towards the Emmitsburg Road to help slow down the advance. But they had to wait for Humphreys' line to clear before they can open fire. And then they start again to fire volleys by rank. So rear rank and then front rank. And after they fire those volleys, they're going to start to pull back. But they fall back, probably, they turn around, withdraw a little bit, turn back around, and fire another volley by rank. So they're again fighting to get back here. Now back behind us, Willard's brigade is finally going to start Barksdale, just in front of the Pennsylvania Monument. The 1st Minnesota goes up against Wilcox. We talked about Willard's brigade. The 13th Vermont is going to come out of the main line, and they're going to claim to advance all the way out here to the Rogers house. Now that may have been an exaggeration, but it did advance pretty far from the main line. And we talked about Carr's brigade withdrawing as a unit. Carr's brigade now, from behind the Pennsylvania Monument, will advance back out here to the Emmitsburg Road. So Carr kept his command intact and was able to actually countermarch back out here against the guys they just withdrawn from.
They came out here again.
They're going to come out here again. As we mentioned, Humphreys is going to be formed on the crest back here north of the George Weichert farm, which is the farm at the intersection of U.S. Avenue and Hancock and Sedgwick Avenues. He's going to send out pickets in front of the line and prepare for more battle the next day. So his entire division now is reorganized, including Burling, back in the area just behind us, right behind the statue on Cemetery Ridge. Humphreys is going to state to his wife, had my division been left intact, I should have driven the enemy back, but the ruinous habit, it doesn't deserve the name of system, of putting troops into position and then drawing off its reserves and second line to help others who have not similarly dispossessed would need no such help is disgusting. So he felt there was no reason to disperse Burling's brigade if all these other units in the 3rd Corps had reserves like they're supposed to. And so that's why Humphreys always felt if Burling's brigade had been left intact as part of his division, he could have held his line out here, if not actually advance and drive back the enemy towards Seminary Ridge. As it was, Humphreys had, with all 3 brigades, Humphreys has a force of 4,924 officers and men. All of the Confederate forces arrayed against him numbered just over 4,000. So he does have almost 1,000-man advantage on defense. And normally when you're attacking, you want to have an advantage of about 2 to 1. So the Confederates aren't going to get that. At best, it's going to be a draw on both sides. But Humphrey felt he was in good position, and if he had Burling backing him up, he could have actually made him mount a countercharge and driven the Confederates way back to Seminary Ridge. As it is, his division will suffer 2,092 officers and men and losses, about 42.5%. Wow. It's the 3rd highest number of losses for any Union division in all 3 days of the battle. Carr's brigade of 1,718 men lost 790, about 46%. Bruce's brigade of 1,837 lost 778, about 42%. Burling with 1,365 spread out all over the field. His regiments lost 513, about 38% of what they brought in. At sunrise on July 3rd, the divisions moved to the left and rear to resupply. Then they're going to be massed behind the 1st and 2nd Corps on Cemetery Ridge. Later they're moved in support of the 5th Corps in the area of the Round Tops. Then about 4:30 they'll move back to support the 1st and 2nd Corps. So they move around a lot on the 3rd day, but they miss out on any of the fighting. They're just arriving after everything's done. On July 4th, 5th, and 6th, they're burying the dead out here and bringing in the wounded. At 3 o'clock in the morning of July 7th, they're going to start the march out of Gettysburg, heading for Emmitsburg, Maryland. And by 6 a.m. on July 8th, they're going to be down at Middletown, Maryland. And on July 8th, Andrew Humphreys is now named Chief of Staff of the Army of the Potomac. When George Meade took command on June 28th, he wanted Humphreys as his Chief of Staff. But Humphreys wanted to command the division in the upcoming battle. So Dan Butterfield is a holdover from Joe Hooker's administration of the Army, which probably at the time was the best thing to do. Because Butterfield knew where everybody was, he knew the organization, and he does his job as Chief of Staff during the battle. On July 3rd, he was wounded by some incoming shell fire. So Meade would take that opportunity to appoint Humphreys now as Chief of Staff. It was said to everybody's relief at that point. And Humphreys is going to serve as a good Chief of Staff for General Meade. In November of 1864, he's going to be given command of the 2nd Corps, and he'll command that until the end of the war. Now keep in mind, Humphreys had not been in command of this division for very long, but he knows this division well enough. And he has a different attitude towards this division than the one he commanded at Fredericksburg. And I think one of the main reasons is those guys were 9-month men. They knew they were getting out, so they were brand new when Humphreys took them over. This is on the other side, a good, well-organized division. It's a hard-fought division. They have a lot of combat experience. So Humphreys can appreciate these guys as real soldiers, as opposed to the 9-month guys. And that's reflected in his farewell address to the division. In pride, he said, in pride from this celebrated division, after having commanded for the brief period of 50 days, I trust that I may be excused for expressing my admiration for its high soldierly qualities. It is impossible to pass it in review even, without perceiving that its ranks are filled with men who are soldiers in the best meaning of the term, and that it possesses in the grade of commissioned officers men whose skill, courage, and accomplishments would grace any service. I want to thank you folks for joining me this morning for the walking tour. Does anybody have any questions at this point about anything we've talked about or didn't talk about?
What is the significance of that saber with the arm sticking out of the...
The arm sticking out, that's the 11th Mass, or the 11th Mass, and that arm is simply taken from the state coat of arms.
Oh.
That's what it means.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yep.
I thought it was kind of bizarre. It's just like he's coming up out of the dirt
I know.
or something, you know, out of the grave. Or
But it is a standard heraldic symbol,
oh, yeah.
and that's why you see it in the state coat of arms.
That's on the Massachusetts state
Coat of arms. You look at the Massachusetts flag, and that's what you're going to see.
Yeah, that's,
Yep.
Here's the sword was missing, and it just looked like a fist.
It just looked like a fist up there. Yeah, we've had to replace the sword a couple of
I
times.
always wondered about that one.
Yeah. I want to thank everybody for joining me this morning. I'll be here for a few minutes in case you have any questions. Again, if you want to get back to your cars, you can either go down Sickles Avenue, then down US Avenue, or pick up the horse road here. And like I said, that's about a 10-minute walk back to the Tulsa farm. But if you go down there, of course, be careful where you step. Okay?